We are pleased to introduce Blake Gilson, Industrial Cybersecurity Ops Manager at ExxonMobil, and Bradley Nash, IIT Perimeter Security Supervisor at ExxonMobil. Please welcome our presenters as they discuss consequences of compromised external network connections.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you to Security Week for allowing us to be here to speak, inviting us. At these events, it really helps us to be able to enhance our security postures, everything that we got going on globally. Blake and I are here very excited to discuss the maturity model process. To do this, we're going to go over several different areas in the L3 and L4, breaches that have been past and current. Then we're going to go into a bit of how ExxonMobil goes through the process and our external network connections. Before joining ExxonMobil, we always joked, because I came from XTO, of the red tape to get anything done with ExxonMobil. Previously, I had worked in smaller companies where, in a smaller company, I was the only IT person. I could make the decisions quick, easy, and if I wasn't the only IT person, it would go pretty quick. You want to install a new router? Man, go ahead and go for it. If you want to update the firmware, get her done. Go ahead and do it on Friday. That way, it's all ready for Monday. Not a problem. Coming to Exmon, I did not see how the red tape was going to be able to help us at all. But I was proven wrong. And I was proven wrong with the external network connections process and the amount of meticulous data that we gather to be able to help us gather and review to enhance our ExxonMobil security process. So here, does a company really know what business they do business with? And the title's supposed to be confusing here. So I mean, yeah, we do know who we do business with. But my AC guy, when he comes to the house, I don't know who else he's working with that day. Sometimes they take my credit card, sometimes they take a check. I had a vendor actually this year go, hey, we don't have a credit card system set up yet. I'm going to actually have to write down your credit card number and go back to the office and be able to file it. Okay, well, what do you do with that credit card number then? I don't know. Do they put it in a locked cabinet? Do they leave it wide open? I'm honestly not sure. Do they put it in Quicken? Does it go to Google? No clue. Right, so I ended up going to get cash to pay that guy because I didn't feel comfortable with anything else. But we can see here from 1980 to 2016, we have breaches in the ICS network. And some of these just stand out to all of us here. Right, we have pipelines, airports, SCADA systems, power plants, medical devices, vehicle ECUs. When was the last time that we went to the hospital and thought, man, if I'm under and somebody hacks right now, would I have oxygen feeding me if I'm getting surgery done? And I honestly couldn't answer that question because I don't know, and I just had surgery done last year. Moving to a new town, which I often do in oil and gas. I think I've moved 5 times now that I've been with ExxonMobil. I think I enjoy it more than my family does, unfortunately. But going to new doctor's offices, the packet of information that we have, I finally just stopped giving out all the information. It was just meticulous. So you sit there, you fill it all out, you hand it to the admin. The admin then looks at it and just types it all into the system anyway. Like, well, if I could do that for you. He didn't really need to do that. But things that always stood out to me was I wanted my address, my medical number, who my insurance was with, social security number. So going to the new doctor's office, I finally just stopped giving out majority of the information. Give them the bare minimum, let them ask me if they need anything else. So good thing, because going to the new doctor for my son, they ended up getting hacked. And thankfully, I didn't put any of that information on. They ended up getting social security numbers, medical information, medical history, addresses, basically everything and anything you think about a person. And my son is under the age of 18, so we're not really constantly looking at a social security number. So anybody could have gotten that and been using it over the years, and I honestly would have no idea. It took that doctor's office 4 months to be able to bring back, or to send me a notification saying, hey, we were hacked. Unfortunately, they got everything. And they sent me a mailing. They didn't call me, they didn't send a text, they didn't, send me an email. Now they sent a piece of paper through the mail because, I constantly check my mail. So I was pretty perturbed, and I ended up calling and talking to that head IT guy. He didn't have much more information. He didn't even know how they got in, other than it was a phishing attack. But they still don't even know. They ended up having a class action suit against him. But again, do we really know what business do they do business with? And the answer is really no. I don't really know. So here we have a larger embedded device data loss. As I talk through this, you might be able to figure out who this was. This happened a number of years ago. So we look here, number one, the large company does business with a third-party contractor for maintenance. Threat actors knew that, so they ended up targeting this person, or this company, and they had a successful phishing attack. So they got the username and credentials. Then they were able to log in through a web browser interface portal, and then that allowed them to get through the firewall. Once they got through the firewall, number 3 here, you can see they got the persistent Windows file server. Once they were in there, they didn't have anything really locked down. So they were able to see everything now that was connected to this. So they were able to get into the embedded system, which is the point of sale, number 4, and they were able to install a malware that harvests from the RAM all the sensitive information. Once they got all this information, they then, number 5, put the information back to number 3 and the Windows file server, and then used an FTP server to get that out to number 6. And this wasn't just small amounts of transactions. These were large amounts of transactions. This happened to be on Black Friday several years ago. So we can see here with the timeline, and this is condensed. So you can see here in the timeline of this breach that November 27th is when Black Friday was, so it happened a little bit just before that. But all those Black Friday sales, every time you used a credit card, they were grabbing all this information. December 15th, they acknowledged the Black Friday millions of transactions went through and they were exposed. Then on December 18th, they acknowledged a breach. So this was going on for several weeks. They acknowledged the breach, and then on the 19th, they ended up reporting that several point of sales were affected. On the 27th, now almost a full month that this has been going on, they reported that the PIN was stolen. January 10th, reports of 70 million additional accounts were compromised. So now we got about 2 months now, and they're still gathering information about what happened inside their own system, and then have to turn around and notify everyone. February 6th, 3 months later, they finally found how the threat actors got into their system. And March 5th, the CIO resigns. In our complex networks today, knowing when a breach happens and what extent is very important, especially in critical infrastructure like we have here at ExxonMobil. For external critical infrastructure, there are government mandates that we have to meet. Sometimes it's, hey, if you have a breach, you got to let us know in 30 minutes. Sometimes it's 3 hours. It all depends. And then we got the questions of, can we still operate? Can we not operate? Do we have to shut down? How does this affect everything else? Where is this in our pipeline flow? All these questions we need to answer, and it has to be quick. So unless we have a data maturity that is mature enough to be able to provide that information quickly, it's almost near impossible, as we can see in that timeline. So I want to talk a little bit about the IoT. So we had some L3 examples, some L4 examples. So on the IoT, on our life cycle, everything is getting more gray, right? It's not necessarily an IT system. It's not necessarily a OT, L2, L3 system. It could be something that's simple as having a weather station that tells me which way the air is flowing. And we need that for some of our refinery sites. Sometimes it's HVAC or other building management systems. You know, maybe the shades go up and down. Maybe I have a parking garage that lets everybody know how many spots are still open. Maybe when somebody parks, the light goes from green to red, so everybody who's coming in that area knows. So what happens if that threat actor got into one of those systems and was able to trigger the fire suppression system in your MDF? Now, some smaller companies that would be devastating, but it might not be one, it might be one office location. What happens if that MDF, like at ExxonMobil, was something that controlled something larger? Now we have multiple sites down. Now we got a country or city, state down. How many of these types of devices in IoT do we set up and then kind of forget? As you can see here, it kind of goes through the life cycle. You got deploy, monitor, service, manage, update, and then hopefully you decommission. But do we ever really decommission older hardware? Sometimes we do. Sometimes we just unplug it and we throw something on top of it, right? So how do we determine hardware from 5 years ago has been updated with the latest security enhancements? Does it have WPA1 still active? Or what about WPA2 when it came out? Or 3? Or anything that's going to come out in the future? Are these connections at the office, or are they out at the site? Because that makes a big difference in a larger company. If it's in the office, we got different security. If it's out and it's almost automated, it's completely different with what we do. So one way the industry went was network segmentation inside of the ICS network. So starting from the left-hand side of the screen, we have the enterprise network goes in through the firewall, and then that goes to everything else to the ICS. We got the HMIs, we got the PLCs, we got control systems, workstations. We even got a historian, data backup, right? We got switches, we got routers, and at the very end, running by the PLCs, we got robots and Q&A and maybe some little nice dashboards, right? As we separate out the network and its function, this allows us to separate the roles for each of these and how it plays. However, if you're looking at this, there's only one firewall, at least in this diagram. So if you got past that firewall, or if you got into any of the PLCs, you basically could potentially have access to the whole ICS. So what happens if somebody got into this environment? What could they do? And that's something we got to constantly ask ourselves. As we talked about with the IoT, the gray area, how do I check the AC control system? What if the company who controls this HVAC company is compromised? What could they do inside of our building? So back to the red tape that we were talking about in the first slide. ExxonMobil looks at each and every one of these external network connections coming into our environment. And we do this by having a dedicated team that has the experience from working out in the field and has worked with these kind of environments. So we look at and identify what connections and what they are, so they could be serial, IP, wireless, third-party support options, or proprietary connections that come with the third-party support options. This dedicated team then makes a simple NAD for quick reference. So we take a larger overall NAD, we simplify it so we can look at it real quick in a glance, and then we very effectively put cute little numbers on it, 1, 2, 3, or 4, so we can actually see which way the data flows. Again, this is just for quick gathering information. When we look at the network flow and decide where the network control points are needed, and we then look at, okay, what are we going to put here? We're going to put a PLC. Is a PLC read-only? Is it read-write? Do we need another firewall? Do we need some kind of packet inspection? We don't know until we actually take a look at everything and look how the network is set up. We require pictures showing each cable, where it connects to, where it connects into. Again, we even label these with cute little pictures of number 1, 2, 3, or 4 on the number diagram. So again, I can look at the simplified NAD, and then I can look at the pictures and be able to go, okay, there's 1, there's 2, there's 1, 2, 1, 2. And I can easily and quickly gather all the information about a complex network connection. There's several layers of management that sign off on this. So the business knows, and IT knows. Once that's done, we have periodic recertification that goes on with this. So it comes up automatically within our system. We go through, and I mean, no one ever changes anything out in the field. I'm kind of guilty of this too. It's 10 o'clock at night, it's late, I got a 3-hour drive home from the rig. I really don't want to be out here. I'll do it tomorrow. But tomorrow comes at 5 a.m., I just drove all night, and I have to drive another 3 hours now in the opposite direction to go somewhere else. Totally forget about it. Or maybe I do remember, but I'm in the car, I can't do anything about it, right? So nobody's ever changed anything on the NAD, or not updated it, or put a new piece of hardware in, or took a firewall out. That's where the recertification process comes in. We're able to take a look, ask for the same questions. Do you have pictures? What's the firewall configuration? What's the PLC configuration? We're doing all this to be able to get our meticulous data. This helps us track those changes and updates, anything that's different inside of our environment. So that was the ICS. The IT also went into doing this with the enterprise networks. So one major difference here, though, is you can see there's actually firewalls at these other locations that's kind of tracking all, no matter how the flow of data goes, if you're the branch office or in the core office or the headquarters, you can see that everything still has to flow through a firewall, unlike our previous one with the ICS. Again, ExxonMobil has a dedicated team, a separate dedicated team that looks at every external network connection that comes in here. We gather all the information that's needed. We look at what kind of technology is being used to interface with our L4. Then we start asking questions. And it might be to the vendor, it might be to the business. Why do you need this interface? And we just don't say, oh, we just need it. No, we need to know exactly what you're trying to do inside of our environment so we can track it, put controls on it, et cetera. Once we gather all this information, we may require specific security settings to be implemented. We confirm the rules. So again, we have a dedicated team that goes through and we're looking at firewall rules. We're looking at the PLC configurations. And on the L4, we're looking at how this is set up and we're making sure that there's no high-risk ports open, for example. Once that's done, you might be thinking, oh, great, we're almost done. No. This is ExxonMobil. We got more red tape. Have you done a risk assessment? No, I haven't. Excellent. Fill this out. Oh, I see here in your risk assessment, you got to do a cloud, or you're going to the cloud. You got to do now a CAQ, a cloud assessment form. All right, let me go ahead and do that. So you got all these different steps that you're going through to get this to be approved. And it's not a quick, simple process. It's really meticulous. Once that is done, we have management sign off. As a final step, once this connection's in our environment, again, we have a periodic review that comes up. Do you still need this connection? Are you using this in our environment? Has anything changed? Prove that nothing has changed in our environment with this connection. Once that is done, everybody signs off on it again, and we keep those records up to date. Another area that we tend to focus on in IT is the access controls and authentication. It's a complicated diagram, but basically we have the enterprise users coming through some kind of form of authentication just to be able to get our data. So we're putting more roadblocks in, more doors down the hallway, basically trying to stop anybody from gathering all the data. So we have physical access, host, authentication to the database server, then database, and then we have a number of tools that are used to secure this, including encryption, Active Directory. Maybe in some larger companies you have two different IDs. So I can get in, and then I have to get another form of ID just to get in further. Or if I want full admin, this is just read, I got to have a separate ID. We also have multi-form authentication. So we really tried to segment out and control who has access to everything. But let's be real. That was all pretty, all laid out, pretty nice. We can see where the flow is going. Networks in real life are very, very messy. We can see here that this network is a friggin' mess. I don't even know where to start on this. And it's messy to be, to the point that real life networks are like this. Maybe plant B is another city or country. Our primary plant still needs to access the outside world, but yet still be able to access the L1 assets there fully on the right. And each plant, we have access that are constantly needing updates and sending data and or gathering that data to send it maybe to a third party to go to a dashboard. Everything connects to the control point, then routes the data to this complex diagram to where it needs to go. Many times we set up the network to the times of that security requirement. So again, we were talking about, do we ever go back and double check any of the security enhancements? Is the firmware most up to date? Have we made any adjustments to those? Now, constant connections into our ICS is needed or mandatory to get the data or changes that we have going on in real time. Does each location have a firewall? Do you only have one firewall? Does all the information have to go to that control point? Does it go to outside? Having a network diagram is great, except for when this changes. And if this changes, has it been updated? So if there is somebody that has bad intentions of getting into our network, do we know what we're looking at? How do we be able to get that information to be able to report this quickly and effectively? And then how do we procure or protect our own assets? So in our environment, we have identified the need for experienced staff who have deployed and worked with this type of messy real-life networks and how to utilize them within our dedicated team, where they go over and verify the settings, configurations of these setups. What is the worst thing that can happen? A lot of times we hear, hey, we're just going to go ahead and put this out. All it does is just send information to this app. That's great. However, they can't prove, the third party, that if somebody did get into their systems, that it would shut down this compressor. This compressor is the only thing that controls this critical piece of infrastructure. If this compressor goes down, this shuts down the whole site. If the whole site shuts down, there's a cost impact. Maybe there's safety impact, environmental impact. We honestly don't know if we're not asking why, and we keep pushing why, and we find out, we talk to the vendor. But again, we ask ourselves, what is the worst thing that can happen? So go back to the first slide, we talked about red tape, and the many examples can be hassles, but in our security posture for the L3 and L4 has benefited the company as a whole with the meticulous data. And to go a little bit further in the maturity model process, I'm going to hand this off to Blake. You have the floor.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
So we're postulating a reconfiguration of a couple security programs and guidances in a different light to try to identify and manage risk better. If we look at external connectivity between systems that need to interoperate for the ongoing facilitation of a process or facility, if we look at the related risk for third-party services that we need to have people have interactive access for remote connectivity, for vendor support, we look at business risks related to email compromise and the sophistication of business compromises. We've looked at those programs almost distinctly and independently. But there's a common theme between them all that may warrant a reconfiguration of how we think about it, and we've achieved such, or trying to produce such, with progressing an external network connection strategy. And this is a little bit like a data loss prevention strategy and program, where there is a million different things you can do to prevent your data loss from protecting. Do you prioritize data leaving out your email system, or is it removable media is your attack vector of loss? Do you want to, is your risk contractors that may be sending email files out, or third-party laptops? Like, what do you prioritize within that program or body of work drives different technology solutions and different strategies, but only when your data loss prevention strategy is combined as a holistic program can you work on the right things first. So if we look at external network connections in that kind of the same light, and we combine IoT, the connections required for businesses to interoperate, exchanging of products and fluids interactively through various means of connecting our systems together with other third-party systems, and we think of interactive access, we can kind of see it in a different light and identify some almost like contradictions in our overall strategy for how we as an industry is responding to some of those threats. Okay, so where do we start? For this point, we break down our risks into two large major categories. Risks originating from the users, interactive access needed by third parties, and machines. And then within the machine-to-machine communications, we embody IoT because essentially it's effectively a machine essentially talking to another machine, that human component on it. And when we implemented external connection security requirements on our operating assets and our business units, we do so with the most due diligence and care. Because we know from headquarters, trying to provide assistance to all of our various assets and sites, we can do significant damage through bad policy way quicker than the adversaries can get into those systems and cause work. So it's with great hesitation and reservations, we add additional requirements to site, especially requirements that require headquarters to be involved. And that balance there is. The reason we specifically called out external network connections as something that requires an extra level of considerations is for the same reason that we require risk assessments, the red tape Brad was articulating. That there is too great of a risk between the business functionality required or enabled through an external network connection and the risk that can generate unrelated to that business value. That unneeded, unaccepted risk that it could be better if it was designed better. It's the difference between an any rule and the specific port or protocol, or that application layer, deep packet inspection particular requirement. That unneeded business risk that unneeded risk to a particular system that doesn't generate any business value is what we're trying to eliminate and mitigate. But of course, as we all know, it takes a special type of person to be able to identify those risks and be able to see those, okay, that's how the system was designed, but how could the system be used? And it's for those reasons, for the same reason we can't risk assess your way to not need a risk assessment, you can't risk assess your way to not understanding what risks you're including when you're connecting company assets and company systems and company processes to external related connections. So that said, the point about how humans or third-party interact with our process control system is, of course, evolving over time. The traditional type of architecture and systems that we saw a lot of 10 years ago was dedicated VPN infrastructure in the process control networks to allow third-party systems and clients from connecting into that. These systems were historically unconnected or supported by the OT side of the house, an engineering component, and were independent and separate from the IT-supported infrastructure. But as we know, these systems are incredibly vulnerable, and the risks to them are growing exponentially. We talked the talk this morning about gaining footholds, or footholds, or trying to kick the door in around those particular public-facing internet services, security appliances being a specific target. The best way to protect a system on the internet is don't put the system on the internet, right? So this model has been falling out of favor about having direct interactive access through dedicated VPN infrastructure for third parties into our process control network, right? So in a general sense, we're all moving away from this. If not, we're totally off of this architecture. And in replacement, of course, as many of you may know, security practitioners, it's hopping on to your existing infrastructure within the IT department, and then 2FA factoring there for your ICS endpoints, ICS-related vendors that need to eventually support particular asset in the process control network, and then once in the enterprise, the security policies and processes can be applied there. Then there's a second set of credentials, many times second set of 2FA required to then access a particular asset within that network. So if you have the traditional flat L4 enterprise network architecture, multiple facilities that may have their own authentication domains, privileged access can be provided to the third party, and the appropriate firewall rules or implemented controls can exist. So we're all moving into that type of architecture where 2FA in IT, 2FA in the OT network, and then you get a more security component, and then your discretion on what you prioritize in terms of what controls would be appropriate, screen recording, video capture, playback, all of those different options you have when you enable this type of connectivity. This is a much more resilient architecture that's scalable and approachable, and especially as our IT networks are transformed and moving away from the normal flat L4, and they're looking at dissolving it, breaking it down, software-defined perimeter, this essential architecture can remain the same. But then if we look at our IIT-related connections or external connections required in the process control network, we seem to be going in a different direction, where there may be various points where we need our machines to interact with each other between third parties. And from the OT ICS network, there's so many different ways we can make these connections, right? The way you form a connection between Modbus RTU and Modbus TCP, radically different risk, radically different strategies we need to entail. But so just naming off a few, of course, we may want third parties to be able to access some of our L3 systems for advanced control applications, data streaming from our SCADA environment. We can have external connections directly into comms modules in our PLCs for exchanging of information, for a swapping of permissives before we flow into a third-party vessel or pipeline, or we can have direct interconnections between the IOs between two PLCs. And all of these different various configurations need its own consideration. And then lastly, we can have the IoT device, that device that may or may not interact with the local network there, or it could be just a temperature probe installed that is not connected to the process network that's streaming data off back off to the other cloud. But this model of connectivity is no more contradictory than what we were trying to get away from originally with third-party access. So if we back up a couple slides, this was falling out of favor, and then we turned around and then moved towards this type of model where we're just connecting and changing our entire attack surface on our ICS in a different direction. So we have to figure out a way to enable these capabilities in a more programmatic and systematic process to mitigate the risks that we're seeing now our ICS environments transform and change. So this is what could be a part of the solution for the machine-to-machine communications, just taking the same model and reversing it on itself. If we do have data that's streaming off our process control networks that we need to get to third parties, the solution for installing it and sending it directly to the cloud is analogous to that same VPN solution where we have inbound VPN into our OT network. It has to be we have to be able to do something better, and we have to be able to move the security mantra forward. A lot of the same concerns is that our process control networks has always been streaming data out. It's a core component of our historization process, and you need to know how many cookies you make to put it into SAP for the accountants, right? Or you have to be able to figure out how to do that. The approach of installing the low-cost sensor to stream it outside, or worse, connect it into your network, changes your attack surface in such a dynamic way. We have to be able to overcome the challenges of moving data through historical historization processes where you charge per tag, or cumbersome ways that we're not agile enough to be able to take data off of the process control and make it available to it. So this postulates a world where we set up another data historization process, another system, as something that is adaptable for more flexible that some of the existing DCS providers weren't intended to accommodate, and get that data out quickly to make it available for third parties to enable those same capabilities, but without the attack surface management problems that the other historical approaches provide. So this could be a way we can move forward on that journey and be able to manage our changing, evolving attack surfaces of our OT networks differently and better. And trying to pull all those different systems together, we can look at trying to develop what we have deemed, to sake of this presentation, as an external connection maturity model to see where you are on that journey of where you want to eventually be, where we think the industry needs to get to, and what you can almost even prioritize where yourself. As Brad clearly illustrated, that where and who you're doing business with in third parties is that key foundational step. Is that if you don't know who you're working with, you can't do anything else on that particular model. But the capability specifically that these enable is that you get more analysis and have the more capability of doing additional work. For example, business email compromise. Business email compromise is a significant risk. The ability for someone to impersonate that third party that you have a trust relationship with, exploit that trust relationship, and then conduct operations against your particular asset just from that business email component. These attacks are getting specifically way more sophisticated than they once were before. Started just trying to spoof the domain or make the domain look slightly different. Now what we've been able to see and seeing in real time is third parties getting compromised, them not knowing about it, and then reviving dead email chains, right? Where there are actually email chains that have panned out, that are old, with our clients on it, and legitimate third parties, and they say, oh, we've revised our pricing. Open this Excel spreadsheet, or open this PDF document, right? That level of sophistication is happening, and of course, all the normal default protections against email compromise should try to mitigate a portion of that, but it is the exploitation of that risk component. But then it also allows you to do and turn actionable information revolving around intel, where you get a steady stream of information about third parties that you may be doing business with that get ransomware, that get compromised. And 9 times out of 10, if not that more, you're going to hear about it from the news before that company is going to tell you that they were impacted on an event, regardless of whatever you write in the contract, of course. So to be able to take that and make that actionable and be able to run those okay, this company has been compromised, we know that there's something happening at them, no great detail, but I have something to analyze and look at initially and specific around what domains are theirs and where have there been possible email communications with our particular clients. That's all enabled through just knowing who your third parties are. And then secondly, knowing where your connections are, knowing where you have those not just business relationships where the relationship is just via email or exchanging of documents, but being able to know where you have system-to-system related communications and what third parties have access into it. Now you can make better informed decisions about, we want to turn off remote access for this company until we get additional information and we can have better risk-related decisions. The next step on that is, how are these connections designed? A lot of these particular connections can be designed at the facility level, where there could be a larger different norms of how you want to connect it. Does a particular business unit prefer serial to IP, or what type of control points and security appliances are used to protect those connections, and then are the appropriate security protections on those, and then what are the nature of those connections. There's a significantly different between at least fiber line between 2 facilities down the road and internet-based connections, but in order to have that nuanced level discussion, you have to be looking at networking diagrams and systems of those configurations. And then the fourth one, that centralizing that solution for human-based interactive access is a key component for preventing what is a significantly higher more of that human that needs that domain the effectiveness of domain admin on a particular system to support it for all the related concerns that entails, versus a programmatic machine-to-machine connection is that in that fourth box. That allows you to have better conversations about 2FA and being able to access and monitor those types of connections at last. And then the last one is that data brokerage service that we were describing. We have to be able to give our business customers a better way to get data out of their environment if we were going to better effectively manage attack surface of our ICS environment. Letting what's happening to the enterprise network, it dissolving and moving to software perimeter, is not a direction we're ready for, right? As mentioned before in the zero left architecture from the colleague from Palo Alto right before us. But because of that, we have to be able to connect the data enablement, data movements program with our cybersecurity to drive alternative solutions than losing all of our data down the back door. It's not only just a data loss risk, it is what are these connections used for from a cyber-related risk, and you have to manage those together, and you have to manage those as a particular program. So here's our contribution to the conversation around external connectivity risk, and hopefully can inspire you to ask some questions about your own programs if you're protecting assets, or if you're a customer and vendor, how we can better incorporate these principles to better manage our attack surface for that. Okay, those were all the prepared slides that Brad and myself had. We have a couple minutes for questions before break. Shoot, if there's anything. I actually can't see, so if there's no questions, please feel free to catch Brad or me. We're going to be here for the remaining of the week. And thank you so much for listening to our content and considering the direction. Thank you very much for your time.
We will now be taking a break. Please visit our sponsors in the exhibit hall.